My name is Levern, and at 28 years old. The knock came just after noon, when the lake lay still under the pale winter sky, and the bare birches stood like sentinels at the edge of the yard. I opened the door to find my father on the porch, shoulders squared as if he were bringing good news. His hands, once roughened by years hauling traps out of Penobscot Bay, now trembled faintly as he reached into his coat pocket. He laid the envelope on my kitchen table with a flourish as though he were presenting a gift. A cashier's check slid out, its neat type announcing $10,000. "There," he said, settling into the chair across from me. "Enough for you to start over. You can find a place in Portland, maybe even Boston. The cottage is spoken for now." To end a $2 million cash offer. It was the smart thing to do. I kept my eyes on the check, my fingers resting lightly on the steel key I wore on a cord around my neck. The air between us carried the faint smell of his cologne, too sharp for the room. "You sold the cottage," I said, my voice steady. "You've been too busy to manage it," he replied quickly, his tone dressed up in reasonableness. "You're running jobs all over the coast, working yourself to the bone. I saved you from drowning in responsibility. This way you can be free." I let him talk. He mistook my silence for resignation, a small smile curling his mouth. He spoke of investments, of a buyer eager to renovate, of how generous it was to hand me a check instead of leaving me with nothing. What he did not know was that I had sat in Claire Nogwan's office in Rockland only 3 days earlier, signing documents that transferred the cottage into an irrevocable trust. What he did not know was that a fraud alert already sat on file at the Knox County Registry of Deeds, waiting like a tripwire. I lifted the check, turned it once in my hand, and set it back on a table. My father leaned back, certain he had won. I rose from my chair and walked to the window, the lake stretching out in silence, the pines unmoved by his schemes. I breathed slowly, gathering the composure that had carried me through harder storms. If you have ever felt betrayed by the people who should have been your biggest supporters, let me know where you are watching from. When I turned back, I smiled, and that was the moment he should have realized he had stepped into a story already written by someone else. The next chapter of that story began with a whisper carried from a Rockport bar. After my father left that afternoon, the cottage fell into the kind of silence that carries memory in its walls. I sat at the table, the check still lying where he had placed it, and thought of the winters that had passed since my mother's death. I was 24 then, old enough to know what loss felt like, but too young to understand how permanent it would be. The probate judge in Rockland signed the papers transferring the cottage to me, a formality that felt less like inheritance and more like a sentence. My father had already grown restless, his attention drifting toward quick ventures and whispered promises of easy money. I stayed. Someone had to. The cottage had been falling in on itself, roof shingles curling, windows swollen with rot, floors sagging where water crept in. I worked jobs in Camden during the day and came back to strip wallpaper, replace joists, and sand floorboards at night. My hands toughened, my back learned the ache of labor, but I kept going. Each repaired beam was a line of dialogue between my mother and me, one I wasn't willing to forget. Through those years, my father's calls came steady. He needed bridge loans, cash for a truck repair, help covering late mortgage payments on a house in Belfast. He swore he could flip. I said yes too often. I told myself it was family duty, that if I refused, he'd spiral into ruin. In truth, part of me believed control equaled safety. If I kept the purse strings, I could prevent disaster. But control has a cost. Every dollar I sent his way pulled me further into silence. A silence where I didn't ask why he needed so much, didn't press for promises I knew he'd never keep. I became the steady wall he leaned against, even as the weight of it bent me. The cottage, though, never betrayed me. Each winter I stoked the wood stove, watched the snow gather against the stone steps, and reminded myself that this house was proof I could endure. Still, endurance is not the same as freedom. It was Owen who reminded me of that with a whisper carried from a Rockport bar. It was Owen who broke the silence. He called late in the evening, his voice carrying the unease of someone who wished he didn't have to speak. He told me he'd been at a marina bar in Rockport, half listening to the chatter over cheap whiskey, when my father's voice cut through. Ronan had been bragging to anyone who'd listened that the lake place would be gone within the week. A deal already lined up, money as good as in his pocket. Owen paused as if unsure whether to go on, then added the part that made my chest tighten. My father told the table I was too naive to notice a signature slipped under my hand. He laughed when he said it. That laughter, even secondhand, felt like a blade. By morning, I was sitting in Claire Nagwan's office in Rockland. Claire had been recommended to me years ago, but I'd never had cause to call. She greeted me with a measured calm that steadied my own pulse. I laid out the story, the debts, the check on my table, Owen's warning. She listened without interruption, then leaned forward and told me plainly, a forged power of attorney was already in motion. If we didn't act, the county could record a deed before I ever knew it existed. We moved quickly. Claire prepared the documents, transferring the cottage into an irrevocable trust, naming me lifetime beneficiary and trustee. I signed each page with deliberate strokes, aware of the weight in my hand. She also drafted a fraud alert affidavit for the Knox County Registry of Deeds. That filing, she explained, would act as a tripwire. Any attempt to slip a forged document through would trigger review. As I walked out of her office, the cold Rockland air hit my face with the force of certainty. I had finally drawn a line that no one, not even my father, could cross. That certainty carried me home, where preparation became my only language. The days after my meeting with Claire moved with a strange rhythm. Each are split between waiting and working. I wanted proof, not just suspicion. So, I filled the cottage with quiet witnesses, small cameras tucked above the doorway, in the kitchen rafters, in the office where my father liked to spread papers across the desk. Their red lights blink only for me, tiny beacons of resolve. Claire arranged for a handwriting expert in Portland to review samples I'd saved. Old tax forms, my mother's will, letters I'd signed for insurance claims. Side by side with the supposed power of attorney, the forgeries betrayed themselves. Loops too shallow, pressure uneven, a signature crafted by someone who thought practice could replace intimacy. Meanwhile, Claire traced the bank activity linked to the buyer. The account led to a man I remembered from childhood cookouts, one of my father's poker companions from Warren. Money shuffled between them in restless movements, small deposits, sudden withdrawals, then silence. It was less a business transaction than a shell game, and the pieces were already falling out of his hands. Marta Lair at the Registry of Deeds called Claire late one evening. She had flagged a packet drop after hours, documents that looked rushed, signatures that made her frown. She promised they would not slip through unnoticed. In her steady voice, I heard the kind of quiet leadership that cannot be bought. One offered to come by to help with the cameras or simply to sit with me through the waiting. I told him no. Control felt safer than company, and I convinced myself I needed to steer every detail alone. His disappointment was soft, but audible before he hung up. I hated myself a little for it, but I could not let anyone touch the edges of my plan. By the time my father called to invite me to dinner, I was ready to let the stage set itself. The Summit Grill sat on the Rockland waterfront, glass windows framing the breakwater light against a pale horizon. My father had chosen it with the flourish of a man celebrating victory. When I arrived, he was already at the table, a bottle of wine chilling in its bucket, menus spread out like props in a play. "Sit down, Lever," he said, his voice full of cheer. "This is a night for goodbyes, but also for beginnings. You'll see." I took my seat, folding the napkin across my lap, as if nothing in me trembled. He poured two glasses of wine, raising his in a toast. "To your freedom," he said. "No more carrying that place alone. I've relieved you of the burden." I let my glass touch his, though I didn't drink. He leaned back, satisfaction lighting his face. "You should be thanking me. $2.5 million isn't a bad price. I've secured our future. And the 10,000, That's my way of making sure you land on your feet." The words slid over me like ice. He wanted me grateful for being cut out of my own life. Instead, I smiled faintly, the expression he mistook for surrender. Halfway through the meal, Claire walked in. She pretended surprise when she spotted me, asked if she might join us. My father's brows rose, but he gestured politely to the empty chair. He still believed he held every card. As the waiter cleared our plates, he began to talk more freely, perhaps in bold and by the wine. His voice grew softer, edged with something raw. "You know, Levern, your mother always favored you, even in her will. That house should have been mine by rights. I built the dock, repaired the roof, paid the taxes when she couldn't, and what did the judge do? Handed it all to you like I was some afterthought." I watched him carefully. Beneath the swagger lay the wound that drove every scheme. He hadn't just sold the cottage. He had been trying to erase the slight he believed my mother carved into stone the day probate ended. Claire caught my eye and gave the smallest nod. The mask was slipping. The stage was nearly set for the truth that would break him open. The moment arrived sooner than I expected when the dinner shifted from performance to trial. The waiter sat down fresh glasses of wine, and Claire leaned forward, her tone almost conversational. "Ronan, I happened to stop by the registry this week. Interesting timing on some documents filed under your name." His fork paused midair. "What documents?" She reached into her bag and slid a folder across the table. Inside lay copies of the trust filings, stamped and dated 3 days before. "This cottage is no longer vulnerable to your signatures. It belongs to an irrevocable trust with Levern as lifetime beneficiary. Any deed attempted afterward is void." My father's face darkened. He rifled through the pages as though disbelief might undo the ink. "You can't do this to me. I already had a buyer." Claire's voice was calm, clinical. "The so-called buyer is linked to a shell account and warrant tied directly to one of your poker acquaintances. Funds never cleared escrow. If you represented otherwise, that qualifies as fraud." He slammed the folder shut. "You think you're clever, but I poured years into that property. Paid bills when your mother couldn't. Lever owes me." I felt the words burn, but I kept my composure. "I don't owe you theft." He leaned closer, lowering his voice as if secrets could save him. "You don't understand. I'm drowning. Thomas and Linders are breathing down my neck. I can't walk the harbor without someone reminding me of my debts. Selling that place was my chance to stay afloat." Claire's expression hardened. "And forging a signature? Exploiting your own daughter under Maine law? That's document fraud, attempted theft by deception, and financial exploitation of a family member. The district attorney could press charges tomorrow." For a moment, the swagger drained out of him. His eyes darted toward the window, where the lighthouse blinked against the darkening sky. Then he straightened, summoning a last defense. "So what now? You going to drag me off in handcuffs?" "Not yet," Claire said. "Prosecutors often weigh restitution. If you begin repayment, if you cooperate, it may affect how charges are pursued. But make no mistake, your exposure is real, and the clock has already started." Silence settled between us, thick as the tide outside. He shifted in his chair, suddenly smaller, and I realized this dinner was no farewell. It was the first hearing of his reckoning. The real terms would be set in the days that followed, when boundaries had to be written in ink. The morning after the dinner, I drove back to Claire's office with the tide still low along the Rockland shore. The file from the night before lay open on her desk, its pages marked with yellow tabs. She asked what outcome I wanted, her tone steady, her eyes searching for the line I was willing to draw. "I don't want this swept under the rug," I said, "but I also don't want to see him in an orange jumpsuit if there's another way." Claire nodded, already drafting. "We would initiate civil action, not to punish, but to preserve leverage." At the same time, she outlined a restitution framework. Ronan would begin repayments from whatever assets he could liquidate, attend mandatory financial counseling, and sign a covenant forbidding him from contacting me about the property or attempting to interfere with the trust. Any breach would trigger both the civil case and the criminal referral waiting in the wings. When I explained this to Owen over coffee in Camden, he frowned into his mug. Do you realize what this will do to him? He'll say we're destroying him, not saving him. I looked at my cousin, weary of the balance I had to hold. Maybe both can be true. I can't ignore what he tried to take from me. But I'm not blind to what it means to prosecute your own father. The admission left a taste of ash in my mouth. I feared the weight of public disgrace, feared that even justified steps might sever something beyond repair. But I also knew silence would only invite another attempt. Owen pressed his lips together, then finally nodded. If this is what keeps you safe, I'll stand with you. It was a fragile kind of peace, one that steadied me as I prepared to reset every lock on my life. Back at the cottage, I began with the locks. New hardware gleamed against the old pine doors. Each turn of the wrench, a reminder that control could be practical, not just symbolic. I walked the shoreline afterward, marking the places where erosion had crept closer. Under mean DP rules, I installed low stone buffers and native plantings, building a quiet defense against forces older and more patient than any family quarrel. Inside, I hung to frames above the mantel. One held my mother's original deed, the paper yellowed, but still legible in her careful script. The other displayed the new trust certificate, crisp and formal proof that the cottage's story had not ended with betrayal. Together, they told a lineage of survival. Ronan tried to slip through anyway. He called Owen, spinning the same tired lines about family loyalty, about how I had been poisoned against him. Owen told me later he listened, but this time he didn't bend. If you want to talk about money or the house, he said to Ronan, do it through Claire. Hearing that gave me a relief so sharp it nearly felt like grief. At my next meeting with Claire, I found myself confessing what I hadn't dared name. The more I tighten things, the more alone I feel. I keep thinking if I control every hinge and every dollar, nothing can touch me. But it leaves no room for anyone else to stand beside me. Claire closed the file gently. Safety matters, she said. But walls can turn into cages if you never open the gate. Her words lingered with me long after I left, carrying into the last weeks of summer when Camden streets grew crowded with visitors and the air hinted at change. By late August, Camden streets pulsed with tourists. The farmers' market filled with crates of blueberries and jars of honey. Harbor Park overflowed with families listening to music by the bay, the rhythm of a town that looked and touched by private wars like mine. Ronan had begun restitution under Claire's supervision. The payments were small, clipped from the wages he earned repairing boats and awls head, but they came on time. I kept each receipt in a folder, not for revenge, but because the record mattered more than his promises ever had. I needed my own act of repair, one that stretched beyond bloodlines. So, I set up a small grant through a local land trust designed to help homeowners fight deed fraud. A few applications arrived within weeks, people with stories too familiar, signatures questioned, neighbors coerced. For the first time in months, I felt my vigilance building something rather than only guarding against loss. Then, a letter came in Ronan's hand, unadorned and plain. No apologies, no excuses, just a single request to stand at the road and look at the cottage once more. I carried the letter to the lake, read it on the granite steps where my mother used to sit. The request was modest compared to the damage done, and yet it stirred something complicated. After days of weighing, I allowed it. One visit, supervised from the gravel shoulder beyond the gate. When he came, he kept his distance. He looked at the roof lines, the stone chimney, the birches shifting in the late summer breeze. His face was unreadable, but his silence was the closest thing to respect I had ever received from him. By September, I understood the future would be written in boundaries, not bargains. A year passed in measured increments, marked not by drama, but by steady, deliberate steps. Each month, Claire sent me updates. Ronan's partial compliance, small payments logged, counseling sessions attended. None of it erased what he had done, but it carved a rhythm of accountability I could live with. When I met Claire in her Rockland office, She spread the file across the desk. He's meeting the terms, she said. Not perfectly, but consistently enough to keep the civil action in abeyance. I nodded. It was not forgiveness I felt, nor the hollow ache of unresolved anger. It was something quieter. The recognition that I could not fix him, only fix the lines he once crossed. Back at the cottage, the air carried the first bite of autumn. I had prepared a shadow box for the mantel. Inside, I placed 3 things. The still key I had worn around my neck, the trust certificate with Claire's crisp filing stamp, and the photograph of the cottage my mother had taken the summer before she died. Together, they told a story of survival, of what was nearly taken and what had been reclaimed. I stood back and studied the display. The key no longer needed to rest against my skin. It belonged there behind glass as both artifact and promise. The cottage breathed with its own quiet life around me, its walls no longer trembling under threat. Outside, the birches swayed, and the lake caught the light like polished glass. My father's shadow lingered somewhere beyond the gate, but he no longer stood inside. That boundary was mine to keep, and I intended to hold it. The story of the cottage was not me. Name is Elma, and at 26 years old, I threw myself a birthday party for my 25th birthday. My parents didn't show up, but my sister brought her friends. They trashed the house and locked me out in the cold just for fun. I didn't make a scene. I just did this for weeks later. My sister was sobbing at the police station. If you have ever felt betrayed by the people who should have been your biggest supporters, let me know where you are watching from. I threw myself a birthday party for my 25th. Not a rigor, not a big dramatic bash, just dinner, small, familiarly, home-cooked, like a normal person trying to reconnect with the people who made her. I had this totally naive idea that if I made it meaningful enough, maybe they'd show up literally and emotionally. Spoiler, they didn't. I just moved into a new apartment. It was sleek, clean, and didn't smell like decades of someone else's cooking oil. A soft upgrade from the shoe box I used to rent with peeling laminate and neighbors who screamed at each other through the walls. I scrubbed it for 2 days like a real estate agent was coming for a photo shoot. Candles, cloth napkins, actual glassware that hadn't come from a gas station promotion. I cooked short ribs from scratch, my mom's favorite, because apparently I still thought that would mean something. Dinner was set for 6. At 6:05, the short ribs were going cold, and I was standing by the window like a Labrador, waiting for someone to come home. 6:10, I called my mom. She answered with that bright apologetic voice she uses when she's about to do something objectively awful, but doesn't want to be held accountable for it. "Oh, sweetheart, we forgot to tell you. We have tickets to the opera tonight. Non-refundable tonight. So you're not coming. Rain check. Okay, love you. Love you, sure. Just not enough to reschedule your night of fancy singing." I didn't bother calling my dad. He was either already in his seat at the opera or pretending not to know what day it was. Next, I tried Grandma. She picked up mid-laughter. "Oh, Alma, honey, I'm out with my ladies tonight. Bunko night. I thought you knew." "Nope. But hey, nothing says beloved granddaughter like being ditched for a dice game and spinach dip. I'll see you at Emily's on Saturday," she added cheerfully. Emily being my cousin, the golden child. She probably gets custom gift baskets just for remembering to breathe. So by 6:30, I was staring at a perfectly set table, candles flickering, food untouched, all dressed up in a clean apartment filled with silence. But wait, it gets better. Belle, my younger sister, texted me at 7:58 p.m. bringing a few ppl. Hope that's okay. Spoiler, it was not okay. But oh right, she showed up at 8:15 with 10 people, 10 strangers. One of them was wearing sunglasses indoors, and another asked me if I was the roommate. They tumbled in like I was hosting an after party, and they'd lost the address. Belle blew past me with a happy birthday, like she just remembered what day it was. I figured more the merrier. She said, handing me a bottle of wine she didn't buy. They rated the food I made like it was a Vegas buffet. One of them poured vodka into my wine glasses. Another started dodging from my Bluetooth speaker, replacing my soft background jazz with what can only be described as electronic chaos. I pulled Belle aside. I didn't plan for this. I have work tomorrow. She blinked like I'd just spoken in Morse code. Hey, well, relax. It's your birthday. Be fun for once, right? Be fun. The recurring feedback note of my entire childhood. At some point, someone yelled, "Hey, Elmer, can you check outside? I think the food delivery is here." I stepped out because I'm still the kind of person who assumes people mean what they say. The door closed behind me, locked. I knocked lightly at first, then harder. Nothing. The music was so loud the hallway vibrated. I waited. I tried again. Still nothing. After 5 minutes of standing in the cold, like a doorman with bad luck, I walked down to my car, sat in the driver's seat, and stared straight ahead. I could still hear the bass thumping. I could see shadows moving through the windows. The house party was in full swing without me, and not a single person noticed I was gone. I didn't cry right away, not because I'm strong, but because I was too stunned to process the absurdity of it. I threw a dinner for the people who raised me, and I ended up locked outside my own apartment by people who didn't know whose name was on the lease. That's when the tears came. Quiet ones, the kind that sneak up on you when your body realizes you're not joking anymore. And then I picked up my phone, not to call anyone, but to make a few edits. First, bank app canceled the $600 monthly auto transfer to my parents' mortgage. I'd been helping out just until Dad's hours picked back up. That was over 2 years ago. Then tuition account. I'd been co-paying Belle's grad school tuition since she decided media studies was her calling. Paused the payment, then clicked permanently withdraw support. I wasn't angry. Not yet. Just crystal clear. They didn't forget me. They just didn't think I mattered enough to prioritize. That's a different kind of sting. I sat there until the music faded, until the house got quiet, until my candles burned out inside and my birthday died quietly outside. But something shifted in that car. They thought it was just a party. What they didn't realize was that they'd handed me a match and pointed at the bridge. The morning after the party, or whatever that was, I stepped back into my apartment like a guest walking into the aftermath of someone else's bad decisions. The smell hit me first, a mix of alcohol, burned wax, and the unmistakable scent of someone's cologne that I was 99% sure had come from my bathroom shelf. My living room looked like a group project for people who'd never cleaned before. One rings on the coffee table, a crushed bag of chips on the floor, a sticky patch on the rug that I didn't even want to investigate. My decorative bookshelf was missing half its plants. Someone had shoved an empty beer can into the soil of my snake plant like it was a recycling bin. And then there was the bed, my bed, crumpled sheets, makeup on the pillow, someone else's jacket at the foot. I didn't even want to know who had slept there or with whom. I didn't say a word. I just started taking pictures, photo after photo, quietly like I was collecting evidence at a crime scene, which emotionally wasn't that far off. Belle came out of the kitchen holding a cold slice of birthday cake with her bare hands. "Hey, last night was wild, huh?" I looked at her. She looked at me like we were co-stars in a buddy comedy. "You good?" she asked mouthful. I stared at her, then passed her to the wreckage of my evening. "Do you even know I slept in my car?" She blinked. "Wait, seriously? I thought you left to go see someone or something." Of course, why would it even register that I never came back in? That I might have been locked out? That maybe, just maybe, I didn't want to spend my birthday shivering in a Honda Civic while strangers used my toothbrush as a stirring stick? She laughed. "You're so dramatic sometimes. I mean, it was just a party." I didn't answer. I didn't have to. I'd already started making the cuts. But here's the thing. This wasn't new. Not really. This wasn't the first time I've been forgotten. Just the first time they did it with music playing. Growing up, I was the reliable one, The solid one. Elma can handle it. Elmer doesn't need much. Elma's fine. I was 3 years older than Belle, old enough to remember the shift when she was born. The way my mom's eyes sparkled around her. The way my dad's arms always seemed more open when she ran into them. She was the sparkly one, the fun one, the one with the dimples and the perfectly timed jokes. I was the straight kid who made her own lunches and didn't complain when my birthday was rescheduled 3 years in a row. Once for a flat tire, once for a last-minute vacation. They forgot to tell me about once because Belle's gymnastics tournament took priority. Spoiler, she placed 4th out of 5. I remember one Halloween when I asked to be Hermione Granger. My mom told me she didn't have time to figure out a costume, but Belle got a handmade Elsa dress and glitter in her hair. I went as a student, which, in case you're wondering, is not a costume. At 14, I got accepted into a competitive writing program. My parents glanced at the email and told me that's nice. When Belle got chosen to be the school mascot in 10th grade, they brought balloons to her tryout. By the time I graduated college early with honors, they said, "We're proud of you," and then immediately changed the subject to Belle's upcoming spring break trip. So, yeah, I'd been invisible for a while. That birthday dinner was just the first time I stopped pretending it didn't hurt. And I know what you're thinking. Why did I keep trying? Because hope is stupid like that. It makes you believe that maybe this time will be different. That if you just do enough, if you just are enough, they'll see you. So, I kept showing up. I helped pay the mortgage when my dad's got cut. I chipped in for grandma's medical bills when she needed dental work. I paid a third of Belle's grad school tuition because she said she couldn't focus on studying with money stress. I was always the helper, the fixer, the invisible scaffolding holding up their lives. But that morning, standing in my own apartment like a stranger in someone else's mess, something shifted. Belle went back to scrolling on her phone. One of her friends emerged from the bathroom, looking like a raccoon who'd lost its will to live. No one offered to clean. No one said thank you. No one even asked how I'd slept. I walked past them all quiet and closed my bedroom door behind me. I sat on the edge of the bed and let the silence settle. For the first time, I wasn't wondering if I'd done something wrong. I was wondering what would happen if I finally stopped doing everything right. Belle left without saying goodbye. Not that I expected anything resembling an apology or even basic self-awareness, but a sorry for turning your birthday into a frat party would have been a nice surprise. She didn't text. She didn't call. She didn't even fake concern about the wine-stained rug or the fact that someone had slept in my bed with their makeup on and left half a lash strip on the pillow. So, I sent her the invoice. It wasn't passive-aggressive. It was just aggressive and accurate. $1,235 itemized. $300 for professional deep cleaning. Yes, that was wine in the floorboards. $150 for new bedding. $85 for a ruined rug, $90 for a replacement decanter, and $600 to replace my sanity. Kidding mostly. I attached photos of the damage, included a due date, and sent it with the subject line cost of chaos. No snarky message, no emoji, just the facts. She read it, left me on the scene, then posted it to Instagram. Not the whole thing, obviously, just the total and the first line. Cut off for dramatic effect. My sister invited me to her birthday dinner and then sent me a bill. Pull underneath. Insane or iconic. Apparently, I'm the villain in her story. The neurotic big sister who dared to ask for compensation after being locked out of her apartment. The comments were about what you'd expect. What kind of psycho charges family? Girl, what did you do? She sounds like she watches true crime and takes notes. My personal favorite. This is why I don't talk to my sister either. They're always jealous. Jealous of what? Her minimum credit score. Her ability to weaponize brunch. It would have been laughable if it didn't sting. because in that moment I realized something. She really didn't think she'd done anything wrong. Not just Belle, none of them did. The next day the phone rang. Because of course Thelmer, she said, immediately exasperated. What is this thing Belle posted? Did you really send her a bill? She trashed my apartment. I said that wasn't a visit. That was a home invasion with wine coolers. She said it was an accident. So is Chernobyl. She's your sister. You keep saying that like it's a coupon for free labor. There was a pause then, and I heard you pulled out of the tuition payments. Oh, that I said. Was I supposed to ask permission? You could have given us a heads up. You could have shown up to dinner. That's not the same. No, I said one is common courtesy. The other is me financially carrying a woman who doesn't know how to use a trash can. She gasped. That's cruel. She posted my invoice on Instagram with a crying laugh emoji. I think the cruelty ship has sailed. Another pause. Longer this time. Then we're asking you to reconsider. I let the silence stretch. Because she needs the help, she added. Or because you do. Guess she didn't like the question. The day after that, my dad called, which was like a lunar eclipse. Rare, weirdly timed, and usually followed by a sense of dread. You know your mom's upset. She usually is. We might have to cancel our trip to Arizona. You know that, right? Right, I said, because I stopped covering your mortgage a bead. We relied on that, he said, and for once, he didn't sound angry, just tired. We weren't expecting you to just cut it off like that. You weren't expecting me to grow a spine, he sighed. You're making this all about money. No, I said. I'm making it about respect. Another pause. You're throwing away your family over a bad night. That's the thing, I said. It wasn't just a bad night. It was the final one. Then came Belle. She didn't call. She just showed up. Hair messy, hoodie oversized, phone in hand. I opened the door and leaned against the frame. Hey, she said. I waited. I got dropped from the tuition plan. I'm behind on rent and now I have to get a job. Like an actual job. I raised an eyebrow. That's usually how it works. I've never worked during school before. And I've never been locked out of my own apartment before. We're both experiencing growth. She narrowed her eyes. You're punishing me. No, I said. I'm just not volunteering for more damage. She stared at me like I was speaking a different language. Maybe I was because I was speaking in limits, boundaries, things she'd never been asked to understand before. I don't have time for this, she muttered, then turned and walked away. Good, I didn't either. That night, I sat on my freshly cleaned couch in my freshly cleaned apartment and finally breathed. I wasn't waiting for another apology that wouldn't come. I wasn't hoping they'd text me first. I wasn't checking social media to see if someone had posted another vague insult about cold-hearted sisters. I was just alone, but for the first time, it didn't feel lonely. It felt like mine. The notification came in at 3:00 a.m. Your card was used for a $2,438 payment at PNW Tuition Services. I stared at it for a second, assuming it was some kind of delayed charge. But the number didn't match any previous invoice, and I definitely hadn't approved a payment in the middle of the night. And then it hit me. Belle, I'd forgotten that card was still linked to her school's online portal. Rookie mistake. She didn't ask, didn't even warn me, just waited until I was distracted, logged in, and used my account like it was her own personal emergency fund. She didn't just cross a line, she lit it on fire. By noon, I was sitting in a plastic chair at the precinct, filing an official report for unauthorized use of my credit card. I also handed over the photos, an itemized damage list from the party I never wanted. It wasn't petty. It was necessary because if no one else was going to draw the line with her, I would. She called the next day. Unknown number. I only picked up because I thought it might be the bank. Emma. Her voice cracked like it had been holding everything back until now. I'm at the police station. I didn't say anything. They called me in. They said you reported me over the tuition payment, correct? You could have just asked me to pay it back. You didn't have to. Her voice broke. You didn't have to do this. You didn't ask when you took it. There was a pause then. Full meltdown. I didn't know what else to do. I couldn't get the payment through in time, and the school said I'd lose my spot. I couldn't go back to working the cafe. Elma, I was exhausted. I couldn't study. My friends all ditched me because I was always working and tired. I was falling behind and she choked out the last part. I didn't know what else to do. It was the most honest thing she'd said in years. And still, I didn't flinch. You stole from me, I said. You humiliated me, lied to everyone about it, then used my credit card behind my back. I was desperate. I was to the night I sat in my freezing car while you laughed with your friends inside my apartment. Silence, please, she whispered. Can you just drop the charges? I let that hang in the air. Then I said no and I hung up. She was ordered to pay me back every cent in installments with interest. The tuition charge, the apartment damage, everything, $3,773. She called it financial ruin. I called it finally growing up. A week later, my parents showed up uninvited. Of course, that was the family brand. I opened the door and saw them both. Mom with her judgment face already loaded. Dad standing behind her like backup muscle with a mortgage. We need to talk, Mom said. Not really, I replied. She walked in anyway. Dad followed, arms crossed, jaw tight, like someone had dared him to parent for once in his life. I can't believe you reported your own sister to the police, Mom snapped. Do you understand what you've done to this family? I think the better question is, do you understand what you did to it? We raised you. We gave you everything. You raised me to be quiet while you overlooked me. You gave Belle everything. I paid for the house you live in. Dad stepped in. We're not doing this again. This tantrum, this act. It's gone on long enough. Act, I laughed. You think this is an act? You think I'm playing? You're punishing us for something that happened one night. Mom said one night I'm done being the bank account, the babysitter, the emotional sponge. You didn't come to my birthday. You let my sister ruin my home in my name. And when I stood up for myself, you blamed me. You could have talked to us. I tried for 25 years. They stood there speechless. So I delivered the final line. You want help? You want money? You want access to me? They nodded to fast, to hopeful. Then you should have treated me like family when it counted. And I pointed at the door. Now get out. I didn't slam the door. I closed it gently, firmly, like sealing a box. You're done unpacking. Then I did the last few things I needed to do. I blocked Belle's number, removed my name from every shared account, left the family group chat, deleted the contacts. Not because I was angry, but because I wasn't planning on reopening the wound. And then silence. The kind that doesn't ask anything from you. The kind that fills your apartment and your bones like fresh air after a storm. A few weeks passed, nothing from them. And for the first time in forever, I had room, actual space to breathe. I started saying yes to happy hour. Started texting back the friend I kept canceling on. Started sleeping better, laughing more. Spending money on things that actually brought me joy, like therapy and dinner with people who showed up. On my 26th birthday, I didn't throw a dinner. I didn't light candles or cook a meal no one would eat. Instead, I ordered pizza, wore sweats, and had 3 friends over who brought wine, laughter, and 0 expectations. And that night, when someone raised a glass and said to people who actually show up, I smiled. Not because it was clever, but because this time I knew they meant me. I know some people will say I went too far, and maybe once I would have wondered that too. But now I sleep better. I smile easier, and for the first time in my life, I don't feel like someone's backup plan. Still, do you think I did the right thing? Let me know in the comments. And if you want more stories like this, don't forget to subscribe.